This is an awesome story and the kind of thing that can really make you feel good about the future if you're worried about, like I mentioned, climate change earlier in the day. People are working on ways to make buildings clean the air. The Tribune Tower is pretty old. I don't know if they'll be able to retrofit this building, but a very familiar Chicago landmark, the old post office, as you're coming in on the inbound Eisenhower, you go underneath it. There's a proposal out to help turn that into a green skyscraper / monument. We'll put a picture of it on the Pinch Hitters page, maybe Mike McConnell's page, WGNradio.com. And on the line, we have the executive director of the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. He's also an associate professor in the College of Architecture at IIT. He knows stuff about buildings. His name is Antony Wood, joining us on WGN. Good morning.
Good morning.
Tell us more about how a building can clean the air.
Well, there's a number of ways that buildings can do that. We did a project here with the students of architecture at IIT, and we took 6 sites in the city and developed a different scheme on each one. So the one you were talking about was the old post office tower, where we brought back into play this huge building, which is not being used by recycling all the waste that comes out of all the office buildings in Chicago, bringing it through the tunnels that exist under Chicago and into this building. But another tower that we did, which specifically scrubs the air of carbon, is called the Congress Gateway, and it's 2 towers that kind of lean in slightly over the Congress, the main Congress driveway. So it creates a gateway to the city. But what it does, at the top of the tower, it has a closed loop system where basically it scrubs carbon out of the air. It feeds the carbon to algae, which is grown within the facade of the building to produce biofuel, which then fuels a fleet of cars for hire that are in the base of the building. So it kind of like works from top to middle to base, scrubbing the air and providing a biofuel to feed a new fleet of cars of the future.
That's fantastic. It sounds like science fiction. Obviously, you guys and girls have done enough work on this to make it feasible. You said the facade would have algae inside of it. So would the building be like a green tubular structure? What would it look like?
Yeah, it does. And if you can get an image of it up on your website, your listeners can see it. But I mean, on one level, it's a traditional residential tower. But what it has is this area of the facade which actually streaks down the facade where this algae is grown in tubes. Now, you mentioned science fiction, and I have to be honest with you. This has not been done before on the scale that we were proposing in this hypothetical design. But the technology exists. The technology for sequestering carbon, for sequestering or capturing CO2 exists. The technology for feeding algae and producing biofuel exists, and as we know, the technology for fueling cars on alternative power also exists. So really the proposal is putting all these 3 together whilst reconciling it in a kind of traditional residential tower or 2 towers, and creating this gateway over Congress.
What sort of stuff do these algae spit out, like for fuel for a car? It doesn't spit out gasoline, clearly, but what sort of alternative fuel source is it?
Well, it's a biofuel, so it's kind of like it's like an oil. I mean, the algae itself produces this oil, but it's not like oil that you get from from under the ground.
Okay.
And the byproduct of using this in the cars is water. So it doesn't produce it doesn't pollute the air back in the same way that a traditional oil would.
So that's fantastic. If you had like a flex fuel car right now, would this biofuel work in it, or are car engine technology still a little bit off on using this?
Well, as I said, Alex, there's a certain element of science fiction in it.
Okay.
It doesn't exist at the moment, but the technologies are all there. And this is what we need to be doing, pushing the boundaries And that's what we're trying to do here at IIT with these projects.
I know I'm pushing it because I want this to happen already. Like I want to look over to the West Loop and see this beautiful arch. He's Antony Wood again. He's with the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. This proposal put together, it's been visualized very beautifully, and it talks about how much it could scrub out of the Chicago atmosphere. I mean, you've got, according to traffic data, 77,000 vehicles pass underneath the old post office each day right now.
Yeah.
The proximity of this carbon dioxide eating algae would effectively take that CO2 out of the atmosphere and create energy as well. And plus, it would look really cool. Doesn't it look cool?
I think it looks cool for sure. But we should get this in perspective. That there are 77,000 carbon-emitting vehicles flying through that corridor every day. You create these two buildings, which residential space with the carbon scrubbers, with the algae, it's still only going to have a little dent on the total carbon in the air in a city so immense as Chicago. And really, what the building is suggesting is a prototype, a prototype technology that could be included in all buildings. And that's what it would need to truly scrub the city, in the same way a few years ago, the future of tall buildings was predicted as harnessing wind energy, and so you started to see these wind turbines on a lot of tall buildings, which actually became problematic, but that's another story.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing with this proposal is that it proposes to use the energy, the dynamic energy, kinetic energy created by the cars zooming through that corridor as well. I mean, cars use energy to move, but they also potentially can create energy, kinetic energy, through the building moving through that corridor. So at the base of the building, there are devices within the road which is actually capturing that kinetic energy as these cars, kind of move over each of these energy collection points.
That would be amazing. That would just be like every single motion that we go through would create more energy. I know there's always issues in making that work, and you lose energy through friction and heat along the way. But that would definitely the vision of Chicago in 2112, for example, would just be fantastic. I do have a question about green architecture, because I've noticed this trend here in the city, and I think it's spread to other cities as well. The rooftop garden. A lot of high buildings now have garden space on top. It seems like it looks nice. Does that really have an effect on helping with CO2 reduction and climate preservation?
Massive effect, not to be understated in any way. In fact, one of the things that I'm advocating is that the roof is not enough, and actually we need to start building our buildings out of vegetation, and expressing them within the facade of the building as well, which is happening all around the world. I mean, Chicago touts itself as the greenest city in America, and that's largely because of its green roofs. I mean, actually, Chicago, I think, has problems on sustainability levels where it doesn't even have a proper recycling program, waste recycling. Mm-hmm. So, but not to, undersell the green roofs. It's massive because, these green roofs are soaking up the energy, soaking up the kind of sun where the sun is not needed in the spaces. So it's kind of insulating the building from both the cold in winter and high excessive gain in summer. It's soaking up the CO2 in the same way this project is. It's creating natural habitat, and it's reducing what's called the urban heat island effect. So all these non-natural materials absorb the sun during the day and then emit it during the night, so that the city is several degrees warmer than, kind of rural areas at a time that you don't need it in summer, where everyone's trying to keep cool. So the vegetation has many, many advantages, but the green roofs are the start of it. We need to bring it into the full three dimensions: the ground plane, the facade, and the roofs of the building.
He's Antony Wood. He's with the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. So would you say that certain buildings who maybe already have like ivy on their walls, would they already be a step ahead in helping combat this excess of carbon dioxide in the air?
To step in the right direction, although ivy has a few problems in terms of its invasiveness on the actual building materials. But there are projects around the world, in Singapore and elsewhere, where they use other materials. We now have 60, 70-story green walls. And a final thought for you is this: the greenery is one thing for all the reasons that I just mentioned, but if we could actually turn the greenery into agriculture, and as part of this studio, we did what was called a vertical farm, a high-rise farm, then not only would it achieve all the effects that we're talking about, but it's also achieving agricultural produce at point of need in the city. And that's another movement we've seen in Chicago and elsewhere, is these urban farms that are growing up. Well, let's bring that up into the vertical realm as well, and then we're really cooking.
He's Antony Wood. We're going to get a picture of the proposed CO2 ingress. They